Wyoming Territory, June 1878. The sky was still streaked with smoke when Quillen Ashford rode into the burned-out homestead, his rifle resting easy across his saddle and his boots dusted with ash. He saw the wreckage, first the blackened beams, the buckboard flipped on its side, and then he saw her. She was standing in the middle of it, barefoot, dress torn at the hem, her arms wrapped around two children who clung to her like she was the only thing left in the world. Quillen slid off his horse slow, hands open. "Madam," he said, voice steady, "you hurt." The woman turned, eyes sharp as broken glass. Her cheeks were smudged with soot, but there was no mistaking how tightly she held those children. A girl and a boy, both under 10, shaking from whatever had happened here. "No," she said. "We're alive, that's enough." Quillen nodded once. He looked over the remains of the cabin, the scorched fence line, the bodies of two men lying near the barn, one with a knife still in his chest. "What happened?" "They came last night," she said. "Tried to take the girl first. I killed one. The other two ran when the fire caught." She shifted, shielding the kids with her body. "We stayed alive, that's all that matters." He did not ask about a husband. She was alone now, and from the look in her eyes, she had been alone long before the fire. "I'm Quillen Ashford," he said. "You got a name?" She hesitated before saying. "Willa Ray." He waited, letting the silence settle. The boy behind her coughed, his face blotchy with smoke. Willa looked down fast, her hand brushing over his curls the way a mother would, but there was something off in the way she held them. "Protective, yes, but not quite maternal." "They yours?" Quillen asked gently. "No," she said. "Their mother died in Kansas. I found them by the river 2 months back, no kin, so I kept them." He tilted his head. "You took in 2 strangers' kids on your own." She looked at him like she was tired of explaining. "I know what it feels like to be left behind." That hit hard. Quillen scratched at the stubble on his jaw, glancing at the sky. "You can't stay here." "Not with no roof and no walls." "I know. Come with me," he said. "I've got a cabin west of Medicine Bow. It's quiet, safe. You and the kids can stay there till you figure things out." She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" He met her eyes without blinking. "Because I came looking for strays. Looks like I found 3. She did not speak for a long time. The children looked up at her, waiting. Then Willa stepped forward and took his hand. The ride to his place took 2 days. Willa rode behind him on his horse, the children sharing the small pack mule he called Clover. They barely spoke, but he saw the way she kept her arms around the kids at night, her eyes never fully closing. She did not flinch when wolves howled in the distance. She just moved closer to the fire and kept watch. His cabin sat tucked against the edge of the Sierra Madres, a modest pine wood place with a stone hearth and one window that faced the sunrise. When they arrived, she helped unload the bags without being asked, carried both children over the threshold, and set them down like she had been there before. Quillen cooked beans and cornbread that night. The girl, Kara, barely spoke, but the boy Kellen asked questions between bites, his voice scratchy but curious. "Are you a cowboy?" Kellen asked. Quillen smiled. "I ride, I brand cattle, I shoot straight." "So, yes." "I suppose I am." "Did you ever shoot a bad man?" Willa looked up fast, but Quillen only nodded. "I have." "Good." Kellen looked down at his plate. "She did too. She saved us." Quillen glanced at Willa. Her face stayed calm, but he saw her hand tighten slightly around the spoon. She did not deny it. After the kids fell asleep on makeshift bedrolls near the fire, Quillen stepped outside, letting the mountain air settle over his shoulders. He heard the door creak behind him. "You do not have to watch us," Willa said, her arms folded across her chest. "I know I do not." "Then why are you out here?" He looked at her, his voice quiet. "Because it is easier to breathe where it is quiet." She stepped beside him, her shoulder barely brushing his. "You always help strangers." "Not always," he said, "but I know what it is to carry things alone. And I know what it looks like when someone's done it too long." She did not answer, but she did not leave either. The next morning, Willa found a hammer and started fixing the porch step that had split. She patched the window frame too, while Kellen followed her around with nails in his small fists. Quillen watched from the fence line, arms crossed, a slow warmth building in his chest. That evening, she sat beside him on the porch after the kids had gone to sleep. The lantern light flickered over her face. "I was not always like this," she said. "I used to wear lace and laugh at dances. I had a name people respected. Then I made one wrong choice and everything after was a fight." He looked at her. "What kind of choice?" She shook her head. "The kind that ends with you hiding in the hills, carrying children that are not yours, and wondering if anyone will ever look at you without seeing the dirt you crawled through." Quillen leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I do not care where you came from, Willa. I care that you said yes when I offered you my hand." She turned to him slowly, her eyes softening. "Why?" He smiled just a little. "Because you took in 2 kids when you had nothing. Because you fought to keep them safe. Because you are still standing." Willa looked down at her hands. They were rough, scarred at the knuckles. "You do not know who I was before." He reached out, touching her wrist gently. "I know who you are now." Her breath caught. She did not pull away. For the first time in a long while, Willa let someone see her without the weight of what came before. She sat there while the stars blinked to life above them, and her heart, guarded for so long, shifted a little closer. And beside her, Quillen stayed still, warm and quiet as the fire inside, his hand resting lightly over hers. The first rain came 3 days after they arrived, soft and steady, like the land was trying to remember what kindness felt like. Willa was spreading cornmeal over a flat stone near the hearth when Quillen came in from the shed, sleeves wet to the elbow, a coil of wire hooked over one shoulder. "Fence won't hold through summer storms," he said, setting the wire down by the door. "I'll need to run new line west of the creek." Willa didn't look up. "What do you need me to carry?" Quillen leaned against the wall, watching her shape dough with the backs of her hands. "You don't have to help." "I know," she said, brushing cornmeal from her fingers. "That's why I asked." They worked the pasture together the next morning. Willa handled the wire, boots sinking into the softened earth while Quillen hammered posts into the black soil. The boy, Kellen, sat cross-legged nearby, fashioning a whistle from a hollow reed. Kara stayed closer to the cabin, piecing together a rag doll from scraps Willa had given her. By midday, Quillen wiped his brow and glanced toward the tree line. "You ever work land before?" "Not like this," she answered, eyes scanning the horizon. "But I've done harder." He didn't press. The wind shifted, lifting her hair in a loose wave behind her. She tucked it behind one ear with a motion that didn't seem to belong to anyone watching for danger. That evening, Willa found Quillen sitting at the edge of the porch, a block of wood in his lap. He was shaving it down with a slow, practiced hand. "What's that supposed to be?" she asked, leaning against the door frame. "A horse," he said. "Though I reckon it's still just a block with dreams." She stepped closer. "For Kellen," he nodded. "You always make things for children?" she asked. "Only when they look like they need reminding the world can still be soft." Willa sat down beside him, knees drawn up. "I don't know if I believe that yet." "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to stay long enough to let it try." Her voice was quiet. "What if I don't know how to stay?" Quillen set the wood aside. "Then I'll show you." The next day, Willa walked the ridge trail above the cabin. The children stayed behind, Kara quietly stringing dried flowers at the table, Kellen nestled by the hearth carving a crooked arrow from a willow branch. Quillen met her near the bluff, where the pines thinned enough to show the valley below. "I used to think I'd end up alone," she said, her voice carrying low across the wind. That the only way to keep others safe was to stay far enough away they couldn't be touched by my choices. He didn't speak. But then you offered me a place here, she went on. And I keep waiting for you to ask something of me in return. Quillen's eyes stayed on the clouds drifting over the far hills. I don't need anything from you, she looked at him. Then why are you still here? He turned to face her fully. Because when you took my hand, you didn't ask where it would lead. You just held on. That's enough for me. Willa exhaled, slow and uneven, like something long locked inside her had shifted. You don't know what I've done. I know you're here now, he said. And that's all I need. That night, after the children had fallen asleep beneath the quilt Willa had mended with her own worn stitches, she found Quillen near the corral, checking the rope ties on the gate. The moon caught the side of his face, softening the weathered lines. You sleep out here, she asked, sometimes. She stepped closer. You could come inside. His hand stilled on the latch, but he didn't look at her. You sure? She nodded once. I'm tired of standing in doorways. Quillen turned, his voice low. Then come through. She did. Inside, the fire burned low, casting flickers across the beams. Willa sat down first, cross-legged on the floor, her hands folded in her lap. Quillen joined her, close enough she could feel the heat of him, but not so close as to press. I don't know how to be anything but cautious, she said. Then be cautious, he answered. Just do it near me. Willa reached out, brushing a calloused finger over his wrist. He met her eyes without flinching. I'm not asking you to forget anything, he said. Only to believe that what you are now is more than what came before. She let her hand stay there, resting lightly against his skin. And for the first time since she'd run from the wreckage of her old life, she didn't feel like she had to explain her presence in the room. She just belonged. The long June light lingered late into the evening, stretching golden across the ridgeline. Willa stood at the edge of the garden plot behind the cabin, a hoe resting against her hip, her fingers stained with soil. The beans had taken, and the squash was sending out pale green shoots. She'd cleared the rocks herself, dug each shallow trench with care. The earth here was stubborn, but it gave back if you asked it right. She heard Quillen's boots on the path before she saw him. He carried a coiled rope in one hand and a small burlap sack in the other. His shirt was damp at the collar, and the sun had caught the bridge of his nose. Found wild onions down past the creek, he said, holding the sack out. Figured you'd want to cook something better than dry flour and beans. She took it, brushing her arm against his. You always bring offerings when you find a woman working your land. He glanced toward the rows she'd made. Ain't my land anymore, not if you're planting roots here. Her fingers tightened around the sack, the weight of the words sitting heavier than the onions inside. I never thought I'd stay put again. Felt like the kind of thing meant for other people. Quillen folded his arms. You didn't strike me as someone who waits around for permission. I didn't, she said, eyes on the soil. But surviving's different than living. He tipped his hat back, squinting into the low sun. You're doing both now. They didn't speak for a while. A sparrow darted through the brush, and the wind stirred the scent of pine and something sweet blooming close. Kara asked me today if we'll still be here by autumn, Willa said, her voice quieter. I told her I didn't know. I didn't want to lie. Quillen looked at her, jaw tightening just slightly. Do you want to be? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I know it's the first time I've wanted to know the answer. He nodded once, then turned toward the cabin. Come on. Let's put those onions to use. Inside, the children were building a fort beneath the table using spare blankets and the old saddle blanket Willa had washed and dried on the line. Kellen peeked out, face smudged with dust, a wooden horse clutched in one hand. Is it safe from bears in here? He asked. Quillen crouched near the edge. Safer than it is out there. I don't think bears know about forts, Kara whispered. Then you're one step ahead of them, Willa said, kneeling beside her. The fire crackled while Willa cooked. She stirred onions into cornmeal batter and fried small cakes in the old cast iron pan. The smell filled the cabin, warm and savory. Quillen set the table with care, laying out the tin plates and smoothing the cloth with the back of his hand. After supper, Kellen fell asleep with his head in Quillen's lap, the wooden horse still clutched tight. Kara curled against Willa's side, her breath slow and even. "They trust you," Willa said, brushing a strand of hair off Kara's face. "They trust you first," Quillen replied. "I just followed their lead." Willa looked down at the girl's small hand resting in her own. "I didn't know how to raise children, still don't. But you stayed when most wouldn't," he said. "That counts more." Later, outside under a sky thick with stars, Willa leaned her arms on the porch rail, the cool air lifting the edge of her blouse. Quillen stood beside her, close but not touching. "I used to think love was something you earned by being good," she said. "Clean, untouched. But that kind of love doesn't last when the fire comes." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "Love that only shows up when things are easy ain't worth much." She turned to him. "And what about the kind that shows up after everything's already fallen apart?" "That's the kind that sticks," he said. Willa stepped closer. "Even if the pieces don't fit like they used to, especially then." She looked up at him, her face open in a way it hadn't been since the night of the fire. "I want to stay." He reached for her hand, their fingers finding each other without hesitation. "Then stay." "I don't have anything to give you," she said. He shook his head. "You gave me your yes, that's all I ever needed." When he leaned in, she didn't pull back. The kiss was quiet, steady, like the mountain air around them, no fire, no rush, just something solid finding its place. Behind them, the cabin stood warm and full. 2 children safe within its walls, the garden stretching out into the dark. And for the first time in years, Willa didn't wonder what came next. She already knew. By midsummer, the air carried the dry hush of heat and pine, the wind moving slow and low across the tall grass. Willa stood at the wash basin behind the cabin, sleeves rolled, her arms wet to the elbow. The water ran cold despite the sun overhead, fed from the mountain spring Quillen had shown her the week before. She worked methodically, laying each shirt and pair of socks across the slatted drying frame he'd fixed with her help. Behind the cabin, Kellen was chasing a grasshopper through the tall weeds, laughing in the breathless way boys do when they forget to be afraid. Kara sat in the shade, stitching buttons onto an old muslin blouse Willa had let her claim as a project. The girl had a careful hand, steady even as the fabric pulled. Quillen came around the side of the cabin carrying a cedar crate marked with a brand Willa didn't recognize. He set it on the stoop and crouched beside it, prying off the lid with a short-handled hatchet. Willa dried her hands on her apron. "You trading again?" He reached into the crate and pulled out a pair of oilcloth-wrapped bundles. "Stopped by the trapper station east of the basin. They owed me for pelts I brought in spring." She stepped closer, watching as he unwrapped the first bundle and laid out 2 carved tin spoons, a woolen scarf dyed deep rust, and a thin stack of books none knew, but the binding still held. "I thought the children could use something to read," he said, offering her the top volume. Willa ran her thumb along the edge of the page. "You always think ahead like this." "I lived alone a long time," he said. "Gives a man time to notice what emptiness looks like." She gave a small nod, then reached for the second bundle. Inside were packets of seeds, turnip, parsnip, and a rare patch of sugar beet. Her fingers stilled on the last one. "This isn't local." "It's not," Quillen said. Old man Arnott brought it back from Missouri, said nobody wanted it 'cause it won't yield quick. She let out a slow breath. Takes patience. And water, he said, but it'll grow if it's tended right. Willa looked up at him. You always speak in riddles or just when you're trying to say something without saying it. His mouth twitched, but not in amusement. I mean what I say, I just don't always say it plain. She folded the seed packs carefully. Well, I heard it. That night after supper, Kara and Kellen sat on the porch, their heads bent together over one of the books. Quillen was mending a saddle strap by lantern light, his hands moving with quiet precision. Willa sat near the hearth, spinning wool into a tight cord, the motion soothing in its repetition. He looked up once, his eyes catching hers across the room. She didn't look away. You ever think about what you'd do if there wasn't anything chasing you? He asked. Willa's hands paused, the thread slipping loose between her fingers. I think I'd grow something that takes time. He stood, setting the strap aside, then crossed the room to her. You could, stay past the frost. Put those seeds to use. I'd need a reason. You've got one, he said. You just haven't told yourself yet. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And what's that? He reached for her hand, not fast, not urgent, just sure. Because this place works better with you in it. She didn't answer, but she turned her palm up and let his hand rest there. In the weeks that followed, the days fell into rhythm. Willa taught Kara to string beans for drying and showed Kellen how to trap field mice without hurting them. Quillen split fence rails and brought home salt pork from the trading post, always with something small tucked in his saddlebag, a tin whistle, a bit of ribbon, a spool of strong thread. One afternoon, as the light leaned long and gold across the porch, Willa found herself standing near the corral, watching the mare Quillen had been breaking finally move easy under his hand. He looked up and caught her watching. You ride? He asked. Not in years. You want to again? She hesitated. I don't know if I remember how. He led the horse over, reins loose. Then let's find out. She mounted slow, her jaw tight with nerves she didn't name. He walked beside her as she circled the pen, his hand near but never guiding, just steady. By the time she dismounted, her cheeks were flushed, not from fear but from something else. Something like return. That night she sat beside him under the stars, her head resting against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The world had been louder before, filled with running and ruin and the ache of things not said. But here, beside him, with the children safe inside and the land humming its quiet song, Willa knew what had changed. She hadn't just found a place to rest. She'd found someone who never asked her to be anything but who she was now. And that was enough. The first frost came early that year, silvery and thin across the meadow, clinging to fence rails and the edges of the garden rows that had already given all they could. Willa stood at the cabin door, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, watching the ground whiten. Inside, the hearth burned low, and the children still slept curled together beneath the thick quilt they'd helped her stitch over the past weeks. Quillen came up from the paddock with a small satchel slung over his shoulder and a sliver of blood on his left sleeve. He set it down on the stoop and crouched to untie his boots. Snare caught a young hare, he said. Didn't suffer. Willa nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We'll cook it with the last of the onions. He pulled off his coat, hanging it on the peg near the door. You're up early. I wanted to see the frost come in, she said. Used to watch it from a window in Missouri, back when I still believed there was only one kind of life for a woman. Quillen warmed his hands by the fire, glancing over at her. And now, I know better, she said. I just hadn't known what better looked like. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rose and walked to the small cabinet near the hearth. From the top drawer, he pulled out a folded length of cloth, the edges hand-stitched with blue thread. "I meant to give you this earlier," he said. Willa unfolded the fabric. It was a dress not new but well made, the kind of thing a woman might wear to a town gathering or a church picnic. The stitching was careful, the seams reinforced with care. Her throat tightened. "I didn't expect—" "I know," he said. "But I figured if we're going to take the wagon into town for supplies, you might want to walk in looking like you weren't dragged here by a storm." She traced the hem with her fingers. "You think they'll look at me sideways?" "Some might," he said. "But I'll be standing beside you." She folded the dress gently, set it on the table, and walked to where he stood. "I've never had someone say that and mean it." "I mean it," he said. "Every word." The trip to town took 3 days, one there, one to trade and gather, and one to return. Medicine Bow had changed little since Willa had last seen it from the back of a freight wagon, her hands bound in gilt and her name not worth much. But this time, she walked beside Quillen, the children at their heels and her spine straight. They traded pelts for flour, seed, and salt, and Quillen bought a pair of sturdy boots for Kara, who had nearly worn through the soles of her shoes. Willa found a spool of green thread and a bar of lye soap wrapped in paper. She held the soap close to her nose, the clean scent reminding her of nothing in particular and everything at once. At the general store, an older woman behind the counter gave Willa a long look. "You're Ashford's woman, then?" Willa met her eyes. "I am." The woman nodded once, then handed her a small sack of dried lavender. "No charge," she said. "For the hearth." That night back at the cabin, Quillen whittled by lamplight while Willa mended a tear in Kellen's shirt. The boy sat between them, holding the wooden hare Quillen had carved for him on the trail. Kara read aloud from one of the books Quillen had brought back weeks ago, her voice steady and soft. Later, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Willa stepped out into the cold. Quillen followed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "I didn't think I'd ever be part of something again," she said. "Not without losing pieces of myself in the process." "You didn't lose anything," he said. "You just stopped hiding it." She turned to him. "You never asked about before." "About what I did or who I ran from." "I figured you'd tell me if you needed to," he said. "But I didn't need to know it to love you." Her breath caught. "You love me." "I do," he said. "Not for how you held on, not even for how you kept the children safe, just for you." Willa stepped closer. "Then let me say it back right." He touched her face, his thumb brushing the line of her cheek. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said. "That's why I can say it. I love you, Quillen. I don't need to run anymore." He kissed her, slow and warm, the mountain air wrapping around them like a promise. In the weeks that followed, they built a second room onto the cabin, Willa drawing the lines in the dirt and Quillen measuring each board twice. The children helped where they could, Kellen holding nails steady, Kara painting the new door with leftover wash from the siding. By the first snow, the garden was turned under, the seeds stored in linen sacks, and the pantry full. Willa stood at the hearth one night watching the flames climb high. Quillen came up behind her, his arms circling her waist. "This feel like home yet?" he asked. She leaned back into him. "It feels like the life I thought I'd never have." They didn't speak for a long time. The fire crackled. The wind whispering against the walls sounded more like music than warning now. Outside, snow fell in quiet curtains. Inside, the cabin pulsed with warmth, and nothing needed to be said. Not anymore. They had built something with their hands and hearts, something real, something that would last. Together,